everybody. Welcome back to this month's edition of DeSimone on Deals, the Exit Strategy Podcast. As many of you are aware, this podcast is meant to help business owners who are contemplating an exit from their business for the next 3 to 5, maybe even 10 years. Where our goal is to provide some insight so that you can maximize the outcome of that exit. And how we do that is to introduce you to different guests. Some of them are people within the industry that will help you prepare your business for sale. Some days, like today, we're going to talk to someone who actually went through this process, who actually did a great job of preparing his business for sale, and actually got a great outcome. Or at least I'll be biased. I worked on it, so I think it's a great outcome. I'll let Tim talk about what he thinks. So without further ado, I want to introduce Tim Mazzie, who is the founder and owner of RSIG Security Inc. And his company sold about 2 years ago to a private equity firm that used them as a platform to grow in this industry. So, Tim, how are you?
Good, very good. Thank you. It's been an enjoyable 2 years of retirement so far, so enjoying every day.
Awesome. Do you mind? I gave a quick overview, and I'll fill in some blanks because there's some stuff that you did I thought was really cool and interesting that other business owners should do. But kind of give us a brief history of how you started your company, how it evolved over time, and then I have some follow-up questions from there.
Sure. Well, I started in the industry itself, security industry itself, when I was in college. I was working for some large retailers as a store detective, essentially catching shoplifters while I went to college full time, and it was a great job. I loved the work, and I loved it more so on the private sector than I did on the public sector, where I wasn't going to get involved in law enforcement, anything on the public side. So I stayed within the private sector, and from there, I just worked around with different retailers as investigators, as an investigator for different types of retailers, everything from big box, specialty retailers, jewelry retailers. Um, and during the course of my time, I had always had a need for outside guard services or outside security services. So that gave me kind of an insight as to how these outside companies worked, these vendors worked for us. And probably 24 years ago, I decided, you know what, I think I can build a better mousetrap from the standpoint of security guard services, specifically for retail clients, knowing what, being on the other side of the table and knowing what their needs were. So I jumped out of the retail side and went into the private sector side and started a company called Retailer Security Investigations Group, which is RSIG Security. I had a partner out in Michigan. He started an office in Michigan. I started an office in Boston. And we just rapidly grew and expanded. We started within the retail industry because that's what we knew best. But then we just started following the different verticals that presented their opportunities to us. And over the course of about 22 years, I grew the business primarily here in the Northeast, but we were licensed and operating in several different states throughout the country, as well as we did a lot of international work, more so on the executive protection and tour side of the business. So that's kind of how the whole business started.
Right. So when I met you, it was through an introduction through it was your outsourced CFO, and you were, I think, at the point where you're thinking about potentially selling your business, but you weren't quite sure where you were in that process. Can you talk about that, how you initiated the thought process of potentially exiting with your outsourced CFO, and how that went with you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, every year our business continued to grow, and it got to the point where I knew I was to take it to the next level. I was going to need a lot more resources than I currently had. So using, a lot of really, I guess, dynamic software and accounting software, I was able to see that, I think it made more sense for me to hire or outsource a CFO on a part-time basis, knowing that I would just need him maybe once a month, twice a month, to come in, kind of verify our books, take a look at our numbers, and kind of, confirm and validate what we were doing. We were going in the right direction. And during the course of that, with new eyes set on it, on how we were running the business and how we were doing, the conversation had come up was, well, what is my exit strategy? And originally, I had a 5-year exit strategy. Let's say 3 to 5 years. And it happened quicker than the 5 years, obviously, but I was positioning myself knowing that, I would be exiting the business and I wanted the business to continue to grow, which it was. And if I needed to influx or bring in additional infrastructure to do that, I would do that in conjunction with getting verification through the CFO that, yeah, now's the time to do that. You definitely have the opportunity and the financial resources to do it. So that's really why I kind of looked for an outsourced CFO. I just wanted a fresh set of eyes looking at what we were doing. And the whole time I had a CPA firm that I'd been using for years, from the very initial startup of the business. But they could only tell me so much, and they were just verifying what I was doing. But the CFO was able to give me a little bit more direction as to where I needed to go and what I needed to focus on.
So when you started to think about your 3 to 5 year exit, what were some of the topics or concepts or strategic issues that you were looking at implementing or putting into place so that you would have a successful outcome?
It was really empowering my upper management team, knowing that they're running the day-to-day operations, and if I were to step back, I wouldn't be the one, exclusively holding the secret sauce to the business, so to speak. I would have people that would be in place already that could run and manage the business day to day, and I knew that would be attractive for anybody coming in and looking at us. And if in fact they did keep all of my management team, which they did, um, that would be an easier transition. And that's kind of the thought process I had at the time, and really positioning like certain pieces of the business and focusing on where we would be more attractive to to a buyer coming in terms of where our margins would be with certain clients and certain verticals, and where we would focus our attention in terms of growth, in revenue growth, which also would make it, more attractive for an outside company coming in.
So you hit on all the key points that I thought when we put your pitch book together that I think made you a really attractive target. I want to go back into a couple of these pieces. You talked about having a team in place, which I've talked on other podcasts and other guests have talked about this. And I think you did a great job of where you built the solid team where I don't believe you were in the office when we first met. You were working from the Cape and maybe going once or twice a week for strategic meetings, but you weren't actively in the office making decisions. Is that correct from my memory?
Yeah, what had happened was I had moved. My office was up in Marlborough, Massachusetts, and I had been living up in that area for quite a while. When I moved down to the Cape, it was about 2 years, 2 to 3 years, I think, that I'd been down here. That I wasn't making that commute daily like I was, for the first, let's say, 18, 19 years, whatever it was, where it was my office was literally next door to me. And I was able to work remotely on a lot of things because my people were able to handle and manage a lot of day-to-day stuff. So yeah, I was going in maybe once or twice a week for strategic meetings. I would be involved in new clients, getting involved with new clients and bringing them on board. So I may not be in the office. I may be going into the city of Boston, going to a client site, what have you. So I was still involved, but I wasn't there every day, and I didn't need to be there every day.
Part of the reason I think that happened from my recollection was you had a COO who took on some responsibility and you hired I don't know if I can't remember if you called them your VP of sales or your business development. Tell me how it was, because you used to do the sales, you used to do all the operations. What was the process for you hiring someone and then letting them kind of take charge of their respective areas? How did that process work for you? And what were some of the things that really looked that were helpful to you? And what are some things that you struggle with going through that transition?
Well, I think a lot of times, depending on the position that I was hiring for, was to be a position that I was, currently doing or had done to start up the company. So I kind of knew what it would do, what it entails, and what it takes to do that position and do it, effectively. And so, it wasn't as easy as just hiring a salesperson. I went through probably 4 or 5 different salespeople. over a course of, 15 years. And what I always found was that if you found the right salesperson and you just made sure that they were taken care of, any way that they needed to be taken care of, they were worth their weight in gold. So I put a lot of stock in people that I knew could do the job, and in turn, they were very loyal to the company. There was no doubt that a lot of the little extra things that you would do for people, send them on vacations, let them go out and expense meals with, a family friend or what have you, things of that nature. I really, I think, put the human touch on what I was trying to do and what we were trying to accomplish as a team. And that was a big part of it. Everybody had to be part of a team. There was nobody out there doing stuff in a vacuum or individually, because one person's actions affected another, whether it was sales and operations, financials, from the accounting standpoint. So we always had these people making sure that they could work together well. And I think that was one of the attributes of my company. And I really didn't notice it until a lot of my clients noticed it and said, wow, we've had the same management team here since you've been here. I can't tell you how different that is from other companies that we've used. And I've seen it, I'd seen it firsthand, and I never wanted to have that type of turnover or have that type of new people in, old, on a regular basis. We just want to find a good core and a good team to work with.
How hard was it for you to let go of the responsibilities?
It really wasn't. Once I knew it was in good hands and they were doing a job that, I felt confident in, I took the emotions out of it. And knowing that if I didn't do it that way, I would be tied into the day to day, and I would be making a lot of decisions that were unnecessary that my people could be making. And again, empowering them to make their decisions, I think helped them grow a lot quicker. And they understood that from the respect that, I wasn't micromanaging them. I just let them do what they do. And, when they failed or they made a mistake, that's what it was. We learned from it. And our motto was, let's just not make the same mistake next time. Let's just keep going forward. And I think that's really how we grew as quick as we grew.
Yeah, I can tell the audience here that what Tim's talking about here with his team, that was one of the key differentiators that made his company really attractive and really valuable, is that Tim was a strategic leader. He could go into the details if he needed to, but he trusted his team. He hired them, he trained them, he let them make mistakes. And as he said, just don't make the same mistake twice, learn from your mistakes, and was able to grow that team where they were able to function. I don't want to say autonomously, because like you said, they were a team, but Tim was not a bottleneck. And there's a lot of times when we try to sell a company, the owner's a bottleneck, and Tim did a great job of making sure he wasn't the bottleneck or the choke point. And that's really what made his company, attractive and easier to sell and maximized his value. Um, with your team, one of the things you were able to do is you were able to grow your business. That was one of the things that made your company very attractive. And you tapped into a new vertical. Can you talk about how you, in the 5 years? So I think we sold you in 2021, 22, right around pre-COVID and into COVID. You implemented a new vertical that helped you accelerate your growth. Can you kind of talk about the strategic thinking about doing that?
Yeah, sure. It was more out of necessity. I mean, we, as a security company, we did all types of security. We're kind of people would call us a boutique kind of company because we did a lot of specialty stuff. One of the things that we were heavily involved with was events, and when we talk about events, anything that typically has a national anthem playing off in at the beginning is an event for us, and that's what we were doing. So a lot of weekends, nights, a lot of games, anything really on a lot of college campuses, tours, things that came through, people we were working with. And obviously, when COVID hit, that all dried up. Everything kind of shut it down. So there, at that point, I had probably about 400 to 500 people that worked events for us. Some of them full time, the majority of them part time. They had daytime jobs, but they worked weekends and nights on events because they enjoyed it and it was extra money. So right away, we knew we had to do something for that for that category of employees, and we started looking or started talking to the hospitals within the Boston market, And as you know, there's so many hospitals up here, and a lot of them are under the same umbrella. But what we found was once we got into that vertical and we started providing services for them, they all started talking to each other. And we were very involved with a lot of their meetings, a lot of the chapters that they supported from a security standpoint, we got involved with. So they kind of understood who we were and what we were doing. And essentially, we said, look, we have the resources to help you guys out on one of their biggest obstacles was being able to monitor a patient that came in through the emergency room that was in a hospital that needed monitoring while the entire time they were in the hospital. Traditionally, hospitals would use doctors, they'd use nurses, they'd use technicians, and that would tie them up because they had to watch this one person. And the one person may just be a risk of flight. They may try to take off from the hospital. They may not take their medications. They may try to undo their IVs. They may be off their medications, and they're looking at, hospitals trying to figure out how to stabilize them. So we had an on-call service, and these were all my event people that, again, were sitting and waiting for work. And we would say, you could call us or email us, and we will have somebody on the ground in your hospital within 2 hours. And that process and that program took off. They call it the sitter program, which is essentially we're watching a patient one-on-one for the entire time they're in a hospital. It could be anywhere from a week to up to 3 or 4 months sometimes, because they didn't have beds available to put these people in or take them out and put them in other locations. So that was really one of the verticals as a result of COVID that we took a very heavy interest in it, and it grew and it continues to grow. It became one of my fastest growing divisions within the company.
And from what I remember, you had to do a couple things. You talked to the hospitals. They identified a need. I think what you, from my recall, you came up with a solution saying, "Hey, if I can train a bench of 500 potential security folks with the certification you need to sit by their side, and I can have them here within 2 hours," which you didn't have I don't think you had the ability at that time, but you knew that you would be able to build it using a different type of software. So you basically said, I heard you say X, Y, and Z. If I
Yep.
can get these people trained on this and I can get a package in place where I can get them to within 2 hours, will you buy it? And they came back and said yes. And you started as like, I think it was a test on a couple different hospitals, and it really took off. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was it. That was, we were doing a little bit of work, traditional security work within the hospitals. And during my conversations with the directors of the respective hospitals that we were working for, that was one of my questions. And that's one of my questions. It's always been, it's kind of how we've grown our business is what keeps you up at night? What is, I'd ask them these questions and just listen. And I train my salespeople too. Listen to them. Don't be talking. Listen to what their issues are. And once you start to listen and understand, we would go back and say, how can we assist them with this problem that they're having? And that was one of the major problems. They were just up in arms. They were saying they're pulling my director of security for any given hospital, saying they're pulling my security personnel and making them watch a patient where I need that person to be making rounds and securing the hospital and facility and checking on things. And I just don't have the resources to do it. So that's when we said, well, what if we build it? Would you buy it? And they said, absolutely. And we started with one hospital. I think it was Newton Wellesley at the time. And right away, it just took off.
And I want to reiterate this for potential and make it more generic for everybody, because Tim um, is a true entrepreneur, and some people look at it as an entrepreneur as someone who starts like the startup tech company or the next Google, the next app. And quite honestly, we have entrepreneurs out there just like Tim, where he talked to his clients and asked what they needed. He looked at the resources he had and said, "Hey, I think I can come up with a solution." It also came at a time where he needed to find a solution because his business had a lull because of COVID. And it was just a matter of like keeping your eyes open, your ears open, and being open to how to maximize the resources you have. I think that's the sign of being a true entrepreneur. And I think every business owner out there has the capacity to do that, as long as they're willing to be flexible on how their resources can be used, and they actually listen to the customers, and answer the customers' requests in their and address their concerns. So, Tim, I actually believe that's the another big reason why your company was so successful. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, and I don't want to give exact numbers, but I remember when we started talking, I think that that hospital division, the sitter process, basically brought your business 200 to 300% growth over a 3-year period, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That's
it,
accurate. Yeah. Because again, like I say, once we got into a couple of major hospitals, we found out, okay, they have a hospital located up in on the North Shore. There's 3 other branches up there that have the same problem. So we just started hiring in that area, or we utilized the resources that we had up in that area. Typically, we'd had to hire more because of the demand of their business.
mhm.
And that just kept continuing to grow. And then as the protocols of COVID kind of started going away, the events started coming back. Now we had all these events coming back at us, and our clients were coming right back at us and saying, we want to pick up where we left off. I need, 200 people for this, 3-day music festival. And can you do it? And I said, okay, we can do it. We just need to hire more people. So we could move those people around, and we were able to do that.
And I think one of the keys, a lot of people say, like, I would love to grow, but I can't find the people. You seem to always find the people. What do you think your key to recruiting and retaining staff was?
I think from a recruiting standpoint, we utilize as many different resources as we possibly could. And one thing I made sure that all my managers knew, and even, some of my supervisors, was I always had them have business cards. They may have been generic business cards, they may have their name on them, but if they were in a McDonald's and they saw somebody that really they were impressed with, hand them a business card, see if they're looking for extra work. And we did quite a bit of that. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in an event and somebody and I'd ask somebody, "How did you find us?" He says, "Well, you found me." And I'm like, "How's that?" And they said, "Well, I was, a waiter at this restaurant. I was doing this, and the person just slipped me the business card saying, 'Hey, he was impressed with me. I felt good about it, and I figured I'd give you guys a call, and I'm glad I did.'" So we found a lot of people that way. It was just more like I guess kind of guerrilla marketing. We're out there looking for people as we're doing our business or as we're out there just interacting with people. We started using some of the software that was available for onboarding people as we got busier and busier, and some of the recruiting ads, some of the stuff that was online as well. So it was a good combination of everything. We tried things until we realized it wasn't really working, so we moved to the next phase, and we're willing to try anything because the demand was so there was so high for quality people. And I think at the end of the day, when we look back and I say, really, what kept those people loyal to us, I would have to believe a lot of it was we really provided them with good pay and healthcare benefits, which a lot of companies weren't doing. We provided Blue Cross Blue Shield healthcare, and I said, let's make it available to everybody, regardless of how many hours they work. They may have to pay a little bit more if they're part-time, but if they're full-timers, you get them on a program and get them on a healthcare program that they've never had an experience with, or have never had as a robust program as like a Blue Cross Blue Shield. And we kept Blue Cross Blue Shield, even though their rates went up every year significantly. We just said that's really a lot of the stability we have is I think it's because of that program, all those benefits.
So just recapping for everybody, 3 things that you've probably heard Tim talk about. He built a team that he could rely on, and he gave them authority. He had processes where he could find and onboard people. And then part of that process, he was willing to make mistakes and make course corrections really quickly. He didn't get bogged down on legacy type programs saying it used to work. It didn't work. He moved on. And because of that, he was able to think like an entrepreneur, listen to his clients, and find new opportunities for growth. So that's what I call the holy trinity of business valuation. And Tim did all of those. I would love to say it's because I told him to do it. I didn't. He naturally did that through his trial and error and through leveraging the expertise of his team and some of the professionals he hired prior to meeting me. Um, that being said, Tim, is there any other strategic decisions that you think you made that was helpful as you got closer to thinking about exiting or actually going through the exit process?
I think it was really just shoring up what we had and making sure that we had the best team available. And willing and being honest with everybody and saying, hey, we're going to make mistakes. We've made plenty of mistakes along the way, but there was nothing that was ever critical. It was just like, okay, we'll learn from that. We'll keep moving on. So we would go into a vertical that we had no experience with, but we would go into it with the understanding that if we could understand the process and what their really needs were and listen to them closely, we know we could do it because we're doing it in different verticals, and we know it's a lot of that stuff is transferable. So we just made sure that we spread ourselves out in terms of all different types of verticals in case something did dry up, it wouldn't hurt us. And a perfect example is when the events dried up, we were able to function as a company because we had so many other verticals that we were working within that were non-event, that were steady, consistent work. If we had put all our eggs in one basket or had been an event security company per se, or something like that, it probably wouldn't have lasted. Just because you never know when something's going to dry up or something's going to take off, and you want to be in position for how do you respond to those.
Excellent. So we just spent the first 25 minutes talking about your business, how it grew, some of the strategic decisions to make it positioned well for an exit. Now I kind of want to talk about the exit process when you've met me to the when you eventually got to receive your check for the transaction. Um, Kind of walk through the process as you saw it. I talk about the process a lot on my podcast and I talk to other business owners, but kind of walk through how the process looked to you at a high level as you went through it, and started that. Excuse me, as you went through that process.
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, I didn't really, I knew what the traditional numbers would be for a company of my size within the security industry, and I knew that from my peers. And I've seen a lot of those security acquisitions and transactions take place. But what I really didn't know is I didn't have a valuation. I didn't really know what my company was worth because we were a unique type of security company where we had so many different types of security we were doing. We had some stuff with very high margins, and really strong bill rates. And we had other stuff that, maybe not so much a lost leader, but it wasn't something that, I think was particularly attractive to an outside buyer. But we had great combination of work. So my biggest objective right at the point was, okay, what am I really worth? I need somebody to come in from the outside and do a full valuation on us. And at the end of the day, give me some honest numbers and tell me this is where I think you're at. If you went to market in today's market, this is what you most likely you'd be looking at from a sales perspective. And I think that was the biggest piece that really, once that process was done, I said, okay, I sat back, I felt good, and I said, okay, is there other ways we could start to grow to be even add more value to the company and focusing on certain areas? And again, that was part of my 3 to 5 year plan to do that. However, it wasn't that long of a plan because of the offers that came in. And I remember when the initial offers came in based on the valuation, I was like, well, this is where I needed to be anyways. And I thought it would take me 5 years to get there, but I'm here now.
So we we went through evaluation. You evaluated it. We I think we did a if you sold now, this is what it's worth. If you sold a year from now, if you sold 3 years from now, here's the potential based on maintaining certain growth factors. And as you said, you saw some numbers and said, you know what, the numbers you're talking about are kind of help me hit my goals. Now, can we test the market? We went and tested the market. Tell them about the process of before we went to go to the market of putting your book and your story together. How did that work? How was that comfortable for you? Was it easy for you? Were there times where you were annoyed with us putting the book together? Tell about the process of putting that book together. Tell your story.
Well, obviously, we needed to do that, and I know I wasn't going to be able to do that on my own. It's very hard to, I guess, talk about yourself in light of and be unbiased about it. But as I worked with you and in your team, I was able to really get a better understanding as to, wow, this is who we truly are, and this is how we need to, position ourselves. And it's not strictly coming from me. The numbers don't lie. We're just adding these, we're putting all these pieces together. So putting the book together was a relatively easy process for me. I mean, I think, as quickly as I could get answers to you guys, whether or financial answers, business answers, my objective was not to slow the system down. Is if you needed something, I was trying to get it to you within 24 hours. And I know there were times you're like, wow, you already got this information for us. I'm like, yeah, man, I'm serious about this. I don't want time to slip by or, to be any type of miscommunication. And really looked at it everything from strictly a business transaction and not as an emotional, oh, I'm losing this, or I'm going to give this up, or what have you, because I know that could sway a lot of decisions and information that was going back and forth. So we kept it very business orientated and really were able to just drill down to all of the added information or needed information, I should say, that was needed for building this story, this book, and able to send it out and let other people judge it on their own, or read it and understand who we were and get a better understanding of who we were, where we were going, and how we were doing it.
It's nice to hear you say that it was a relatively easy process because sometimes it can be difficult. And I'll say from my perspective, watching Tim and his team, I think the reason he may have felt it was easy is because he had a team. He had an outsourced CFO that knew his numbers and kind of understood the requests. He had team members that were responsible for different aspects of it. So when we were trying to get different parts of the story, he had different people that were responsible for it. So if he didn't have an answer, he had someone he could go talk to that knew the answer at the tip of their fingers. So it was really easy. Like you said, we got stuff really fast. Probably every 24 hours we made a request. We did get everything back. And it was because his team was prepared. He was prepared. I don't know if his team knew what was going on, but he knew how to ask the questions to get all the information. So I just want to reiterate, Tim's ability to be prepared and have a team in place made that storytelling process, the book building process, much easier and seamless. So we have the book, we go to market. I don't know if you were surprised, but I was pleasantly surprised at how much activity, because we put together a list of, I think, 30 security guard companies, probably 10 to 15 that you gave us. Then we expanded it based on some database researches. We also put it out to some private equity firms that we thought might be interested in your space. Um, and we got a pretty strong response of people that are interested. Tell, kind of walk through your perspective of as we're getting offers and walking through the not offers, getting walking through the in inquiries of interest where people say, I want to learn more. I want to talk to Tim. Talk about that process of having to meet all these people, answer all these questions, and give an overview what that was like.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't very difficult for me because they were just asking me normal business questions that, if it was an industry peer or another security company, I understood exactly where they were coming from. And I knew how they did their evaluations. And again, like I said, because I've been in the industry long enough, I've talked to a lot of people that have exited and sold their companies to other security companies. The piece that was new to me was when the private equity firms approached us, and I think they were looking more of a global like focus, where maybe an industry's peer security company was looking at, hey, I want this piece of business and this, but I don't want this piece of business. That then wasn't really what the equity firms were looking at. Equity firms were looking at everything, and they were willing to really kind of embrace everything that we were doing. And I think that is where I think the valuation was even higher, was with the equity firms than it was with the traditional security companies. Um, and I know I talked to a couple of my peers within the industry, and I told them, what was going on and where my valuations were falling. A lot of people within the traditional market were like, wow, that's phenomenal. I don't think we would ever see that in our market. But I was going outside. I was using private equity now. I was looking at equity firms were looking at me. So you really got to be open to who and who you guys hook up and who you guys present this to, because you never know what's your company worth is probably worth, whoever's willing to pay the most at that point. And that's kind of, the feeling I got as we started going, because right away, I knew I blew the numbers away from the traditional valuations that other security firms were using.
So you talk about the private equity, and when I go and speak to folks and I go to different groups, I hear a lot of fear about dealing with private equities, or how the private equity is going to try to steal the company from you, or they're going to try to ruin the company. What was your perspective in dealing with the private equity? Were they fair? Were they reasonable? Were they sharks? Were they a combo, depending on who you talk to? What was your perspective of how they treated you as a professional?
I think initially they came in with a very fair offer, which, I understood how they got to that. And that was kind of reassuring right up past. They didn't come in and try to lowball it. They came in and said, hey, this is what we think you're worth. This is the reason why we think you're worth this. And it all made sense. And as they asked me more questions, it just kind of cemented in their minds, I think, yeah, this is exactly what we're looking for. And as they explained it to me, and they knew one of my biggest, contentions was I want to make sure that all my managers kept in place and I want to make sure they're taken care of. And whether that's equity within the new company or, a piece of the business, you can't afford to lose these people. These people built this company with me. It wasn't just me, it was my team. And I want to make sure they were all rewarded. And I think that's really where, again, everything lined up with the one private equity firm that we ended up selling to is they came in and said, we're going to use you as a platform. We're going to use everybody in your company. We're going to keep your company intact. And we're just going to grow based off of that platform. And we're going to acquire other companies. And that's really what made kind of solidified the deal for me.
Excellent. Just to clarify for folks, a platform means a private equity buys a company, that becomes their platform, that becomes their foundation of how they're going to enter this industry. What they do is they build up the infrastructure of that company and then acquire other companies, smaller ones, maybe same size, and add them on or bolt them on. So you might hear the term add on or bolt on. So when private equity comes in, they'll either find a platform or they're looking for add-ons to add to a platform. Tim, in this situation, Tim's company was so well run and he had the great infrastructure and he had a lot of different opportunities for growth. He became the platform for this private equity company. The other thing, Tim, you did very well is we tell clients when they go into these meetings that, hey, everyone's going to try to be your friend and they're going to try to get you talking. And we reiterated, hey, there's the M&A Miranda rights of M&A. Everything you say can and will be used against you. So when you talk to these people, be open and honest and transparent, but just answer their questions and don't give them anything extra. And Tim, you were an expert at that. You understood where they were going, you understood the questions, and you gave them very good answers, but you didn't drag them on. How is that process of trying to make sure that you gave them enough information, but make sure that you didn't, like I'm doing right now, have diarrhea of the mouth?
Well, it's funny because, I looked at back and it was just my experience in the history that I have. There were many times that I was called in on court cases and I'd be, on as a witness and, I would have to be cross-examined by attorneys. I would never give them more than that they were asking for. And that was one thing that I learned real quick was like, you have a question, let me answer it for you. And I'm going to leave it at that. Unless you ask me another question, I'm not going to give you any other answers. Um, so when you're doing it that way and you're being very direct about it and they understand that's how you operate. And I think most people did understand it because of my background. They're like, okay, he's been, for instance, whenever I sat down as a witness in a trial or what have you, or we were working a case, the attorneys would say, I can tell you've been through this before. Well, yeah, I have been, and that's because it's my line of work. And I did many investigations, many interrogations myself. So I knew what questions were asked and how to elicit answers without, giving too much information at any given time. So I had no problem doing that. And I think it's just something that I think if you pre-warn somebody, say, hey, look, they're going to ask you questions. Don't give them any more than they want at this point. If they have another question, they come back with other questions, which they did. They'd always come back with other questions because they didn't think of it because I didn't offer it. Um, I was kind of waiting for you to say that. I would ask them that, and they're like, "Yeah, it's a follow-up question to this question." I was like, "Yeah, I was kind of waiting for that," as opposed to me just giving it to them. So again, I was just answering all the questions and being very business orientated and really trying to take the emotional piece out of it. I think is what they respected.
Right. Yeah, and Tim, if you guys could emulate Tim, but he answered every question directly and completely, and that's all he did. And was if they had a follow-up question, he did the same thing. He answered it directly and completely. He never hid anything, but he stayed on message. Like whatever you want to know, I will answer it. And he did that and did it in a very quick and concise manner. That's a really big key as you prepare to go through this process. And Tim was an expert at it, and obviously because of his prior experience dealing with as a expert witness, he was able to do that very well and easily. So now we get through the offers, we negotiate. I'm not going to go through all the different negotiations because everyone's different, but we selected a company, a private equity firm, in for multiple different reasons. I think we compared 13 offers originally that came down to three LOIs that we negotiated and signed one. Now we're going into diligence. Can you explain how the diligence process worked for you on your side, like gathering all the information and answering all the questions from their experts?
Well, again, I had a buffer. I had you guys in between me and them. So you guys were getting a lot of the questions firsthand, and you were relaying them to me. And then I knew there was a little bit of frustration when, somebody from the private equity firm would ask the same question, but they'd ask it in a different way. They already had the answer. So I would just say, look, we've already gone through this exercise. Just let them know if they want to go check this, chart or this chart, and they'll get their answer. It was somebody who was, maybe from an outside accounting purpose or what have you for the equity firm that may have not been on the same page with everybody that was already asking the questions. So that's where it got a little bit redundant at times. But at the end of the day, it's like they weren't dragging their feet. They were just making sure they were, checking all the right boxes. And I was fine with that. I mean, I'd rather them be thorough. I'd rather be a little bit more efficient than they were in some cases, in terms of you asked that question once or twice already, and this is the third time you're asking it. Here's the answer for the third time. So kind of at that point, I'm like, are they wasting my time? Are they dragging this on? But no, it really wasn't. It was just a matter of somebody new was involved on the other end, and they just needed to have their answers, their questions answered. So you have to be patient. There's no doubt about it. You have to have thick skin. You have to be able to say, I'm not taking this personally. I'm just taking this as, you know, another question coming in. And yeah, it's been asked 3 times. Maybe this person's new to the system, so they don't know.
Mhm.
And we just kind of plowed through it that way.
And Tim brings up a good point here is that the other sides, they're big money companies writing big checks, but they hire 5 or 6 different experts to go through different aspects of the business, and they don't all work for the same company. It could be, and I'm picking random names here, it could be KPMG for accounting, and it could be Hale and Dorr for law, and it could be at Gallagher for insurance, and it could be someone else for their HR, and it could be someone else for, not in Tim's case, but for other businesses, environmental or IP. So they have all these different experts that they hire to bring in and look at this company, and none of them work for the same company. So when they come in, they're trying to do a great job for their client, the private equity firm, and they may ask duplicative questions. And that's where I think Tim did a great job, is understanding the process. We tried to filter as much as possible, but sometimes you just couldn't get an eager attorney or an eager CPA who wanted to prove their worth to make sure they got their question asked. And Tim didn't take that personally. He actually said, okay, he understood these people don't know each other. They don't have access to the same information at times. So he was very good at making sure that they got their answers in a quick and efficient manner and didn't create an issue out of that. So that was another key to the process. Is there anything in that process that surprised you, of like why they are asking that type of thing, or information that you didn't think anyone ever want to know when they would buy in a company?
Um, no, I don't think that, I think the only thing that may have surprised me is how deep they would dig on certain things, which was fine because everything had a story to it. Is how did you get into this vertical? How did you get into, you know, um, uh, starting this type of business? Because it's really non-traditional security. It's more of a kind of a hybrid, high-end customer service piece. So I'm like, well, it has a security background to it at the end of the day. So that's how we got involved in it. And it was kind of like going back to kind of, security 101 for me. I'm like, I gotta, there's a lot of stuff I forgot as I've grown in this business. I had to go back and kind of like, re-educate them. And get with the understanding is, okay, they really want to understand how this all came about, not how we're doing now, because they see how we're doing now. They just want to understand, get an understanding how we ended up in that vertical, or how did you end up, doing the security for the Rolling Stones? Well, there's a story to that. So that's what they wanted
Mm.
to hear.
Yeah.
And knowing stuff like that would happen, I was very patient with it because, I knew that was just part of the process. So it kind of surprised me, but at the end of the day, it wasn't anything that put me off or delayed anything. Because my thought was, as quick as I get the information, like I was getting it to you, and I can get them the information and satisfy their needs, they're going to go back to the private equity firm and say, yeah, we've asked him all the questions. He's given us all the right answers. This is what we know. And that wasn't going to hold anything up. I didn't want somebody from the outside trying to hold up this process, because everything's very time sensitive. You have to be able to move pretty quickly on some of these things.
Mhm.
And I think if I had dragged my feet, or if I didn't answer the questions, if I got frustrated, that could have been negatively perceived by anybody, especially the equity firm coming in, and I didn't want that to happen.
Tim's perception here is dead on. It's great. Like, Tim is one of our better clients or best clients. It says he understood that from the get-go, and didn't take anything personally. And if you guys, but as an aside, if you ever get a chance to meet Tim, probably at a golf course or maybe out having a beer somewhere on the Cape or down south, and you get to ask him some of the stories about some of his engagements and how he met certain bands and certain companies that came in for movies. He has lots of good stories if you ever get to meet him. So make sure you ask him about that if you ever see him in person. So I want to touch on, you got an LOI, you go through diligence, and now we've heard, you'll hear different business owners say, yeah, I don't like private equity because they make an offer and then they go through diligence and then they find reasons to reduce the offer. What was your experience going from an LOI through diligence to getting the final purchase agreement signed? How many changes, if any, were there going from LOI to purchase agreement?
There wasn't a lot, and really, if the only changes I was kind of driving was, they were looking at my current numbers, and I was like, well, guys, if you look at my current numbers and you look every year at how we project our increases, we're going to grow. We're growing this year. We're in the middle of a growth period at that time. So, I'm going back to them saying, I think, you got to sharpen your pencil a little bit more. I think we're worth more than you think we are. And, that was really it. They never went the other way where they were trying to come down in their number, or they weren't, sincere and honest in what they were asking us in terms of what they were offering us. I think that always stood. And it was me kind of saying, well, if we do this, isn't it worth more? And I think that kind of set the tone for them. They're like, okay, no, we don't want to pay more than we're offering at this point, but we can see if we keep going down this road, I'm gonna make that case. So it was an easy experience for me. I don't think we really had any real long-term back and forth that I can remember,
Mhm.
anything that they wanted to look at and say, well, we want to devalue this, or this is worth more. They looked at it as the whole package, I think. And I think that's because they kind of got a true understanding of who we are and how we operated.
And I'll reiterate what Tim said. Yeah, I don't see many times companies retrading their LOI, particularly if you give them enough information before then. And to Tim's point, the only time I've seen adjustments is when the business is substantially changing, good or bad. In Tim's case, it was good, and he said, "Hey, we're growing faster than we told you, and if we drag this out, we're worth a lot more money." So we were able to negotiate his behalf because he was doing so well that the dynamics of the business, the underlying economics of the business was positively increasing, and we were able to squeeze a little bit more out of that transaction.
Mm.
Um, Two final questions. They're more short and easy, short and sweet. Knowing what you now know, going through this whole process, thinking back to when you started the process of when you got in your mind, I want to sell. So from that point to you actually sold, is there anything that you would do differently?
I probably would have done the valuation earlier in my work history. I would have probably said, you know what, right away, I'm thinking, as soon as I started thinking of selling, I think that one of the first things to do is get an evaluation done. Have somebody come in with a objective, set of eyes and say, this is what your business would be valued at based on the information that you've given us. And like you guys did, where you said, this is what it's worth today, this is what it's worth 3 years from now, this is what it's 5 years from now, based on growth and revenues increasing, what have you. I think the sooner you can get that done, the better understanding you have. Even if it's 10 years later you sell a company, at least you knew 10 years ago what you needed to do to make you more attractive and increase your value to whomever's looking at it from the outside. Because a lot of times you just get lost in that in your day-to-day business where you're not really focusing on that. You're not thinking that. You're thinking, hey, this is great revenue. This is going to be good increase for business for us. But now I want to think about it. How's this going to look if somebody wants to come in and buy it? Are they going to want to take on this piece of business? And in my industry, there's some stuff that's considered very high risk, and some companies just don't want to get involved in it. And I don't either. I mean, we've never had, good perfect example. I don't know how many calls we've gotten for, nightclubs to say, hey, can you come in and do, bouncing work for us? You be our bouncers and be our security. We never want to do that. Low income housing, we never really want to get into that because it's high risk. If I had done that, I'm sure that some of these companies kind of looking at us would have kind of shied away from it. But I think the best thing you can do is just get the valuation done at a very early process. It costs a little money to get it done, but it's worth its weight in gold when you got a kind of a roadmap as to where you need to be if you're seriously selling your company within that span of years.
Great. Thanks. And last question, maybe it's the same answer. Is there one piece of advice you would give a business owner thinking about selling?
One piece of
Is there
advice.
one piece of advice that you'd give another business owner if they're thinking about selling? Is it the same thing, the valuation, or is there something else, anything else you would?
Well, I think if anybody's looking to sell a business, obviously the reason to sell a business is because either they're going to move on to do something else or they're going to move on and retire like I did. I just tell people that if I knew retirement was this fun, I would have done this years ago. I mean, it's the people are like, "God, you bored? Don't you want to do something else?" I'm like, "There's nothing is boring about getting up every day and doing what you want to do when you want to do it. There's nothing boring about that. I would just let people know that there's a process that you got to go through, and it may be a little bit cumbersome at first, but it's well worth it. It's almost like getting audited, I guess. No one likes to get an audit, but if it's your business or you have a partner and you're in a business together, you want to get a real good feeling as to where you are as a company from a valuation standpoint. Get it done and don't be afraid of it.
Great. That's great advice, Tim. I appreciate it. I appreciate all the time and all the stories you gave us today. Hopefully we get caught up again on the golf course. I don't think we got to do it to get this year, but hopefully next year we get to hit a few balls out there together. So again, thank you for your time and looking forward to talking to you again in the future.
Okay, Greg, appreciate everything you did for us and the company. Real great job you guys did.
Thank you. I appreciate that.